Welcome to the Queer Witch Project, your resource for all things queer and witchy. I am Damona Peacock, a fabulous, non-binary, narrow, spicy, ordained queerdo with a fascination for all things cycles, symbolism, and patterns.
And I'm Moonkittee, your queer femme, poly kitchen witch, and proud geek. Today's topic is moon magic. Hmm.
Ooh.
So, what is moon magic?
Well, as a Cancerian, I am ruled by the moon, so I have a
Mhm.
very deep relationship with her. I have loved her ever since I was a child, and you would look outside, just like you can't pass a cow on the freeway without mooing at them. You can't go outside and not go, moon, you know?
Right.
That's always been my relationship with the moon. There are moon deities, there are
Hmm.
moon goddesses. To me, she's very much a she, but some people see a
Hmm.
man in the moon. I see a bunny rabbit. That's a whole other story.
Hmm.
But it's a satellite of Earth. It's a big rock. It's the closest rock to Earth, floating out there, going around us, circling us, and it has a just like our little stones in our altars have their own frequencies and vibrations and personalities and meanings. Well, there's a big one up in the sky that circles around our Earth that has the same kind of thing. Like she's so powerful
Hmm.
that she affects how water moves.
Exactly. And she controls the tides. And the moon goddess is one of the first deities that I actually worked with. I talked about not doing a lot of deity work, but she was absolutely one of the first. And I
Color me
also,
not
for
surprised.
For being a fire sign, a Sagittarius, the I was born under a full moon.
Oh,
So there very much is a very heavy moon connection to my sign or to my life. So I'm fire, but I have a very heavy moon influence. Now, the moon controls the tides, as we know on Earth, but we often forget that as humans, we are also 60 to 70% water. So the whole old wives' tales, hinting back to a previous episode, about weird stuff happening on the full moon. Yeah, if she's strong enough to control the tides, you're 60 to 70% water. There's a very dramatic thing that shift that does happen in our bodies that when we get closer to a full moon. It's just one of those natural things. She
if
influences
you
water all the time.
if you look at the data,
Hmm.
more women go into labor at the full moon than at any other moon phase.
Hmm.
The emergency rooms fill up faster on full moon. I've had the unfortunate proximity to people who work in law enforcement, and they talk about how more calls come in during full moons. So whether it's old wives' tales or based in science or somewhere in between the two, the full moon has a pull over
Hmm.
our us as a society on a whole. We are
Hmm.
sensitive to these things, just not everybody notices
Right.
or pays attention to it.
Hmm.
But yes, she's
Exactly.
very, very powerful magic, just in and of herself.
Hmm. What's some of the symbology before we dive in a little bit more into the phases and stuff? What is some of the symbology of the moon?
Well, for here, there's a couple of things I would talk about. For one, what I find so fascinating about the moon itself is that, if you're the Earth, here's the moon, and she's always showing the Earth the same face. No
Hmm.
matter where she is circling the Earth, she's rotating. She's just always, you always get the same face. So that means there is a side, the back side of the moon, the dark side of the moon, that you don't see from the Earth.
Hmm.
Only if you're the few that get to go up on a little, slingshot around the moon have you ever like literally been able to witness that side of the moon. And symbolically, I feel like that's very fitting for us to recognize that, there are parts of ourselves that nobody sees except, we can know ourselves. But we have to, that's why we do shadow work. We have to do
Hmm.
those deep dives. So there's a lesson symbolically about the face that we show the world and the face that we keep for ourselves.
Hmm.
The other thing that I like to talk about is the illumination of the moon. That's sunlight.
Hmm.
The moon is not radiating the light, it is reflecting the light. So the moon is a reflection, and also moonlight is an illusion because it is
Hmm.
actually a reflection of sunlight coming at us. So as we forget these things, we just think, oh, the moon's all lit up. Well, but what's lighting the moon up?
Hmm.
And so it's a combination of the energy of the sun bouncing off of the vibrational rock that is the moon. So the light that's coming off of the moon is really sunlight that's bouncing off of the room. It's a
Hmm.
reflection. So
Right.
sometimes the moon can be associated with illusions.
Hmm.
But then there's the moon card and tarot. What do you get from the moon card and tarot when you pull her?
For me, when I pull tarot and I get the moon card, it's a lot about reflection, internal, but also seeing internally and externally. I tend to think of the moon card as that softer illumination, illuminating the things of the shadow side that we need to potentially work on or we need to address. So for me, the moon is often associated with shadow work and finding and illuminating those darker aspects of ourselves. Again, we mean darker, not necessarily in a negative way, but those hidden aspects of ourselves that the moon tends to bring out and bring forth. But also with
Yeah.
that kind of serenity that goes along with it, that this isn't a judgment kind of thing. We're not telling you this is right or wrong. This is simply, are you aware? Here's what is being illuminated in a different kind of way.
Yeah, I think it also speaks to like the mysteries
Hmm.
and bringing light to that mystery, like you're saying, like how we dive into the shadows. But also dreams. It talks
Hmm.
about, how the wisdom that comes to us in our dreams is never straightforward.
Right.
We have to sit and reflect on that too. What does it mean? So I think the moon itself is like the moon card and tarot is about looking at things from a symbolic lens instead of a
Hmm.
literal one.
Right. So with the moon itself, there's a lot of different aspects. Again, you can do deity work, there's lots of different things. But the at its most simple level, because of the rotation of the moon around the earth and that reflection of light, it goes through several phases. So as we see the moon grow and wax and wane, you can see the changes of it. And that kind of also mirrors the cycle of energy that we do in magical
Mhm.
practices. And so if you follow the moon phases and add that kind of as a adjunct to your magical work, oftentimes it can enhance the any sort of work that you're doing, whether it's spellcraft, whether it's rituals or anything else. All of that stuff can kind of tie into those phases. So let's dive into those phases a little bit so you can get a feel for what those are. And of course, the first two big ones are the full moon and the new moon,
Yeah,
right?
I think symbolically I forgot to mention that like that's the other thing is watching the moon go through phases
Hmm.
helps us embody the fact that we go through phases. Like
Hmm.
people who are born with a uterus sometimes follow the moon with their bleeding cycles too.
Hmm.
Like that's sometimes connected to a lunar cycle. So it's really important to be able to see that things change, but also that things consistently come back around.
Hmm.
And yes, we always talk about full moons and new moons when it
Hmm.
comes to moon phases. Those are the two easiest ones to track. Here's my astrology thing that I learned recently is when it's a new moon, it means the sun and the moon are conjunct, which means they're together in the same place in the sky. So if like it's Sagittarius season, the new moon is going to be in Sagittarius,
Hmm.
so you know for a fact that this month's new moon is in Sagittarius or in
Hmm.
Capricorn or whatever, whatever the sun is, that's where your new moon will be.
Hmm.
And then the other thing is the full moon means that the sun and the moon are opposing, or so
Hmm.
they're on the opposite sides between us. That's a full moon, I
Hmm.
believe.
Hmm.
And the full moon will always be in the sign that the opposite from where the sun is. So I always thought that was very like because as a baby pagan, I was like, I don't pay attention to the days of the week, let alone the phases of the moon. What are you talking about?
Hmm.
But now I pay attention to what the moon's doing. And if something's going on in the world energy wise, like, wow, five people are messaging me about something. What's going on? Full moon. Okay, well, I get it. Now I get it.
Hmm.
And well, what is this full moon about this time? And, I like to look and see where it's happening in the sky. I also think that the full moon rises as the sun is setting.
Not always.
No?
Not always. It
Okay.
really depends. Again, words. what type of season and stuff you are.
Oh,
Because there's
okay.
definitely been full moons where they haven't been visible or they're just barely visible on the horizon at very late at night. So,
Okay. Yeah, I've just always been fascinated by the moon, but
oh
it's
yeah.
I have a hard time pinpointing it sometimes because again, it's like that illusion, that mystery. But yeah, so full moon energy is very powerful,
hmm
right? The wolves go howling at the moon.
hmm
Chaos reigns. Maybe sometimes I was just talking about
hmm
things
The
in society.
the tidal pools in our body. Yes.
What kind of energy does the full moon bring for you?
Completion. So it's full moon is about celebration and that kind of really big energy. So full moon, it's up there, it's the brightest it's going to be. This is about the biggest
Mm-hmm.
thing. These are the things that are coming together. This is the manifestation work. So if you are talking about something that you are celebrating, full moon is a great way to give extra oomph to that kind of ritual or celebration that just provides that extra. Okay, everything is full, it's at its apex, it is at its most complete right at that moment.
So it's kind of like a stop and pause and look at what you've accomplished in your plans.
Not a stop and pause. Let's celebrate what you've accomplished.
Celebrate what's working.
Right. The stop and pause comes a little bit earlier in the cycle, which we'll talk about.
Or later, depending on which side you're
Right,
on.
you're on.
I'm just saying, it all comes back around.
Exactly.
So then,
So
so in that
the
case,
new
what is new
moon,
moon? Yeah.
yeah, the new moon then is new beginnings. So that's that, like you said, it's that point where the sun and the moon are in the same point in the sky. So there's no way for the sun to reflect the light off the moon. So that is that point of darkness. And when we think about darkness, we think about the winter. We think about the seeds underground,
Mhm.
getting warm, getting ready to plant, that are at the basis, the beginning of an idea. So new moon energy is really great for new. So new challenges, new ritual work,
Right.
new expectations, new manifestations, anything that you want to plant and see grow, new moon energy can give you a really big boost off of that.
And then we go back to the full moon energy where we're supposed to, see some fruits of the labor that we've planted from at the full moon or at the
hmm
new moon. We planted it at the new moon. By a full moon, we should see some progress. So here's my little tangent.
hmm
We talk traditionally, baby pagans get taught about the triple goddess, and
hmm
the triple goddess is so often a moon goddess, and she's
hmm
the three, she's, waxing full and waning moon.
hmm
And then we don't talk about, I always see the triple goddess as actually having a fourth face because the new moon, the
Right.
unseen, the mystery. But even then, we can break it down more.
hmm And you'll
Um,
see that broken down in a lot of imagery, where you'll see again the very basic symbol is that circle with the two crescent moons on either side, like you're talking about that triple face goddess, where there's actually the dark moon, but she's unseen, so you don't
mhm.
see her there. But oftentimes you'll often see the full moon, that moon's imagery broken out even further. So you'll see the slightest crescents and then progressively working its way up to the full moon in the center. And that's because there are actually 8 phases of the moon when you're really looking at it. So you'll see that broken down. And again, you'll only see 7 because that new moon is off to either end of it hidden because it's invisible, but it's still there in that aspect.
Mhm. Yeah, so we have like, we have like the new crescent. So from new moon, we move into like the first crescent.
Mhm.
And then what waxing means it's getting towards full, right?
Right. Waxing
And
means you're getting
waning
toward it.
means, yeah,
It's
we're
getting
getting bigger, is
right.
brighter.
hmm
And waning means the light is waning, it's going smaller. Yeah,
Getting
so
dimmer.
just, I mean, we know this, but just in case
hmm
any listeners don't. So we have from new moon, we go into a waxing
Crescent.
crescent.
hmm And
And
that is
then,
about yeah, waxing crescent to first quarter to waxing gibbous, full, waning gibbous, 3/4, waning crescent, new moon. And yeah, so there's different phases, and we'll talk about each one here.
well, tell me more about what their energetic properties are.
So for your waxing crescent, that first stage coming in, it's about growth and action. Because remember, you're coming out of that new moon, or we talked about that new moon, that seed being planted, that idea that you want to think about giving birth to. The
Hmm.
waxing crescent is that first initial stage of growth and action. So it's really about motivation. It's about motivating you to do whatever magical activity you're going to be doing or whatever practice you're going to be doing. So if you're looking again on an upward momentum, you're going to want to look at the waxing side. So that first waxing crescent is that first beginning of movement, like the car just getting off the starting line.
So the new moon brings the idea, but the crescent, waxing crescent brings the action, the first step.
Exactly. The first action, the
Okay.
first motivation to start that action to get going.
And by the time we get to our first quarter moon,
Hmm.
we're a week past our new moon, about,
Usually about a
give or
week,
take.
week or so after the new moon. Now you've got momentum that's starting, and now we're at the point where you're halfway there. You're halfway to full. You've got the movement going. Now it's about time to make decisions about where you're at with this
Hmm.
activity. Is it progressing the way you want it to? Do you need to redirect? Do you need to redirect the energy one way? Is it just let it go and continue to be where it's going to be? But that halfway point, that first quarter moon, is that ability to redirect and re-guide so it goes back onto the path of what it is you're trying to achieve.
All right, and we're turning towards full, but we first make a stop at the waxing gibbous moon.
Right, the
So
waxing
it starts
gibbous.
to get brighter, brighter,
Mhm.
bigger, bigger,
We're getting close. This is where you get to that point where you're almost at completion, but you're not quite there. But this is really a period
edging.
about you're yeah, you're edging. You're edging the full moon right there. But no, it's about mindfulness. So when
Mm.
you're at that point, you're almost there. So now it's about, am I getting what I want? Am I listening to what the information that is coming around is being told to me? So am I listening to my body? If my body is saying, you've been going now for um, almost 2 weeks, focusing on something very, very hard, maybe it's time to take a breath, take a pause, take a break, and really just know that you are almost there. So it's about that mindfulness of the magical activity that you're going to be doing and really helping it just get to that last point where you're pressing into, I would say
Success.
completion really comes to that day or two before the full moon, because the full moon
Mm-hmm.
really lasts 3 days, but it's really only one day. But that day before the full moon is really that completion point, and then the full moon is that celebration point.
I love that. I love that. I like, and we celebrate that full moon,
Hmm.
because it's always such a nice moment to like, just feel good about life and feel good about being on this earth and being able to see the beautiful sky out there
Hmm.
and pause and reflect about what sign it's in and what what we're accomplishing
Hmm. And the
with
flip
our
side
magic.
is it's not always because life balancing that it's not always positive. The reason again we have more crimes or more things is you're still pushing something that's coming to fruition. It's just a chaotic energy that's coming to fruition at that point in
It's
time.
a high energy.
It's a high energy, whether that's for used for good or evil or neutrality, depending on what it is, doesn't negate the fact that that's where the energy is flowing.
It's funny too, because I was always one to want to go out and celebrate a full moon ritual with friends. But when we come back to the new moon, it's like something I want to do on as a solo
Hmm.
practitioner. Like that's my time.
Hmm.
It's it for inner work.
That makes sense.
So yeah, it's like it doesn't have to be that way for everybody, but it can be very like full moon could be a very external energy
Hmm.
sometimes, where the new moon can be a very internal energy.
Exactly.
All right, so past full moon now,
Hmm.
we've celebrated
Hmm.
and
We've
the
reached
light is
the
starting,
culmination, the point.
and then we move on to waning gibbous.
Yes, waning gibbous is next. And this is again that time to be thankful. It is
Mm,
accepting the gratitude for what has happened. Because you had the celebration and you had that joy and that you're caught up in that moment. The waning gibbous is really that time to start reflecting and be thankful for what it is or the lesson that you learned, which doesn't necessarily always mean it's going to be a positive thing. Sometimes magical practices don't work and you need to take and be thankful for the lesson that you learned in that
hmm.
period of time.
You don't always get what you want, but you get what you need.
Exactly. Actions have consequences, and the waning
Mm,
gibbous is that moment of reflection on what the consequences of that action is, and the
interesting.
point to learn whether it was helpful or harmful, and how. and to appreciate the lesson for what it is, even if you don't necessarily have to like it, if that makes
Okay.
sense.
And then we get to three-quarter moon, which is about a week in past the full moon and
Hmm.
before a week before the new moon. Three
Right.
quarters. What are we vibing at there?
Now we're talking about letting go. So we've had the big point of whatever it was, celebration, the less then we're gratefulness for the celebration. The lesson was we had this huge thing blow up on our face. We've learned about the lesson that came from it. Now it's about letting it go. It's just
That's
like,
so
okay,
important.
exactly. We have to let it go because we can't live in the past. We have to keep moving forward and progressing and learning about where we're going to go. So now that third quarter moon is that letting it go, letting
I'm
sometimes the
repressing
mag
a Disney song right now, just so you
I know
know.
internally, but in some ways it's like that. It's also about forgiveness in its own
Mm,
kind of way. And even if that's sometimes the hardest thing of forgiving yourself for what may have happened. If you're trauma based or trauma that's happening, you know that trauma is external, but we still tend to internalizing it.
right.
Sometimes that
And blame
forgiveness aspect
ourselves.
of that third quarter moon is that letting go and that forgiving yourself of what happened or how it was directed at you or whatever it may be. And that can be the most challenging part. And I want to say interesting is it is the third quarter moon at that halfway point because we tend to forget that the second quarter moon is the full moon
Yes,
because you were talking quarters being the four phases of the moon. So yeah, so it's
right.
first and third that we don't actually talk about the second quarter moon because that's actually the
Because it's a
full moon.
half. Yeah, it's a
Exactly.
halfway through the cycle also. Yeah. Like two quarters is a half. Like if I
Exactly.
simplify. But yes, also halfway through the moon cycle, although then the question is, this is a whole other probably philosophical question, but does the moon cycle start at new moon or at full moon? And I'm sure people have different answers for
Chicken
that.
egg.
Exactly. It's all a cycle, motherfucker.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so that is the third quarter moon is that letting go, forgiveness, offering yourself and just really just okay.
And then the light
Let's
continues to slip away, and we find ourselves with what I used to see as goddess's little fingernail clipping in the sky
that
that we
little
call a
waning,
crescent.
yes, the
Yeah.
waning crescent. That's release. Because we can let it go, but sometimes we can let things go. That's not exactly the same thing as releasing it. You think they are, they're
Interesting.
similar, but you've let it go. But now it's time to just whew, push it off on its way, release the energy, release any last thing you've been holding. And it's that time to rest. If the waxing crescent is that 0 to 60, that first initial push, the waning crescent is the brakes. It is that ending cycle. Okay, now we're slowing down, we're stopping. We've let things go. The cycle is almost complete. Now it's time to let it go, let it be what it is, release and go
Before you can plant new seeds.
before you plant new
And
seeds at the fourth quarter
yeah,
moon, the new moon.
it's like you have to toil the soil, tend to the soil, and get back to that new moon
Mhm.
and start
Exactly.
the cycle over again in theory.
So that's one of those things. Again, there's all those different cycles, and again, this happens in a 28-day period. 28 and a half is the actual time frame.
If you want to get
So
technical.
if you want to get technical. So again, that's why it'll shift. But again, if you can kind of sync your magical practices to the energy of that moon, it's going to give you that extra oomph. You don't have to,
Hmm.
aside from some very specific spells or rituals, but it's going to help in many ways.
So, what are the some of the things that we can do in each moon phase that will help us capture like the best essence of working with the moon's energy? Like I know a lot of people make moon water, usually
Hmm.
at full moons, right?
Yeah, it depends. Moon water, same
Okay.
thing. Moon water. We've already talked about the moon being the influence over water. You could do moon water at any phase. So if you want to, full moon tends to be the most common because again, it's
Mm-hmm.
that extra energetic boost to the celebration of what you're doing. But if you're talking about doing ritual and magic for new beginnings, whether it's a new house or a new career or a new path of some sort, new moon water with
What
the
do we
energy
do?
of the new moon to add that boost to it.
What do we do with the moon water once we have it?
Anything you want to do. Actually, you can sprinkle it
If
on
it's
plants.
potable, you can
Yeah,
drink it.
you can drink it. I would say if you're going to do that, make sure that you're filling the jar and capping it so nothing could get into it. But
Yeah.
yeah, you could drink it. You could pour it into plants. You could make tea. You can sprinkle it as an offering to deity. Whatever you want to do with moon water, you can. Anything you would do with
Okay.
regular water, you can do with moon water and just use that energetic
Imagine that
enhancement.
it's an energetic enhancement. I like that. That's a really good way to describe it. Yeah. Well, what else do we do with knowledge of the moon phases? What other working?
Divination. I think
Oh,
this is one we could
always
definitely talk about.
big time. Yeah, for me, I like to look and see this full moon is coming up in like Leo or whatever, whatever the sign is,
Mhm,
and then ask questions of the cards specifically about the full moon in this sign
mhm,
and or the new moon. And really again, those are the two I always catch.
mhm.
The others,
It's hard to catch it every single day and figure out where you're at. It really
unless
is.
I'm living outside, which I'm not always,
Hmm.
so sometimes it's just too cold to go out at night. But yeah, I definitely do like to look and see where the moon is
Hmm.
and what it's doing, and
Right.
sit down and ask questions specific to that kind of area of knowledge, so that I can get some specific divination around
Hmm.
um, that energy. Rituals,
Rituals. Again, we've talked about full moon
always.
rituals, new moon rituals. You can have a ritual at any point in time.
Hmm.
Uh,
You can even plan your ritual
mhm.
depending on what you want to do, what you're manifesting, what your intention for the ritual is. You could then plan the date in which you enact it
Hmm.
to coincide with the best moon phase for the
Yes,
working that you want to do.
exactly. And same thing with planned spell work. And this is one that I tend to struggle with because oftentimes, like, oh, I want to do this thing now, and I look up and like, oh, it's a waning moon. Well, do I really want to create abundance during the waning moon phase, or
Now you want to be
do I
calling
want to
it
just
in, not letting it go, not releasing
exactly,
it out. Yeah.
exactly? Or
That part comes too easy. Yeah.
can I wait a week
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and do something that's related to growth? And sometimes the answer is no, and then you got to rethink. So sometimes if I absolutely had to, again, I don't know why I would need to, but I can't wait the week it would take or the 2 weeks it would take, assuming we're just past the full moon. I can't wait the 2 weeks to do the abundance spell at the new moon. Then I'd have to refigure how I'm doing the moons. I wouldn't be asking for abundance. It would be letting go of the obstacles that are holding me
Yeah.
back from abundance. So now
Yep.
you're
That's
turning and transitioning to what it is. You're still asking for abundance, but in the way you're asking for it is kind of roundabout into letting go of the obstacles that are blocking.
that's brilliant. Yeah, so you can also adjust your approach depending
Hmm.
on how the moon's energy can help support you
Exactly.
working. Very smart, very smart.
So yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of fun ways to kind of think about how it
She
can work
has
and work out there.
she has a big pull. She's
She
got a big
does.
draw.
Like I said, it's one of those things that one of the
Moon.
first, the moon is huge. My one of the years at Burning, I think it was my second year at Burning Man. Yeah, because it was the rains. Um, it happened to be a full moon, and
Of
I
course.
was out that night, and that moon on the desert was just insane, and I was the goddess was just like going, nope, you are my avatar tonight, and you are writing this. And it
Mm,
was very, very interesting and very fun. So, depending on where you are, if you are attuned to a moon deity of some sort, and there are several across several
yeah.
different cultures,
Oh yeah.
it's very, very possible that if you have a witchy mindset, you could be called to ride the moon, and that is a very interesting experience if you get a chance to do that. So, highly
So
recommend, but
the
also
I,
know that you're going to be exhausted the next day.
fun times. In fact, the first deity I ever associated with you with in my mind was a moon deity.
Hmm.
Moon was a moon goddess.
Really? I didn't know that. That's cool. Which
Yeah.
one?
You know, Artemis.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
My
You
first is
and
actually
your,
Selene. Selene, to this day, even more than Artemis, tends to be my moon
mm,
deity. The Artemis is right up there.
she is. Um, so the moon and
Hmm.
the earth and the sun and its light do a little dance in the sky,
Yes.
and every once in a while, we can't really discuss the moon if we don't bring up eclipses.
Yes.
Every once in a while, the moon will eclipse the sun, or
Hmm.
the earth will eclipse the moon, right?
Hmm.
So we either have a solar eclipse or we have a lunar eclipse. And the
Right.
lunar eclipse is the Earth's shadow because of
Hmm.
the lineup. The Earth's shadow is now going across the face of the moon, and we have a
Right.
lunar eclipse. Or we have a solar eclipse, in which case the moon comes between the Earth,
Hmm.
where we're seeing, and the sun, and all of
Yes.
a sudden it's blocking the radiant light. So,
Yes.
on a magical level,
Hmm.
that's the scientific explanation of the eclipses, but on a magical level, what do you have to say about eclipse energy?
Proceed with caution.
Mm,
So again, thinking back and looking at this from the perspective historically of what our ancestors saw, a lunar eclipse is
mm,
generally blood red to dark brown. It
right.
is not and has not generally historically been associated with good omens. Is
Mm.
the reason it's called a blood moon, quite often. And with that,
Some
it
people won't even go out in the eclipses.
exactly, it is incredibly chaotic energy when you're
Interesting.
talking about the moon. And it makes sense if you're again talking about the it is the shadow of the earth that's reflected on the moon. Think of all the chaos of earth itself and the humans that occupy the
Oh,
earth and all of that energetic chaos and war and famine and climate change and all that kind of negative aspects is that's the energy that's being projected at the moon to then bounce back. So it is
where she's usually basking in the sun's light. Now all of a
exactly.
sudden she's covered in this earth shadow crap.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very, very chaotic energy.
Mm.
So I often say use at your own risk. Now, I personally don't, but I have. I have done moon water for at a
Eclipse
lunar
water.
eclipse, not really understanding what I was doing,
Oh.
but if you are working some sort of magic that requires chaotic energy or is working directly with chaotic energy, because there are a lot of chaos entities that you may be working with for
Mm-hmm.
whatever reason, you
Mm-hmm.
could potentially use lunar eclipse energy or even solar eclipse. Solar eclipse is also another one that has
Mm-hmm.
incredibly chaotic energy, but use at your own risk and be fully aware of what you're doing and what you're using it for, because you may not get the intended consequence or outcome that you are expecting because of the inherent
Mm.
nature of the chaos.
Okay.
I was gonna say, and the
Oh,
thing with this one, and this is again where this is something that you could probably speak to, is eclipses themselves. We talk about eclipse season, so it never just happens where it's just a solar eclipse or
yeah,
it's
that's what
just a
I was
lunar
gonna
eclipse.
bring
They
up.
come
Yeah.
together in pairs. They always pair up, so they happen
Or
in those kinds of
clusters.
clusters.
Sometimes
Hmm.
it can be a cluster of three, like
Hmm.
it'll start. But I remember following, my friends who talk a lot about astrology, like Ken,
Hmm.
we had as a speaker on here one time. He talks about how wherever the north node and the south node are
Hmm.
will be the places in which in the sky that'll bring the lesson of the eclipses. That's where the eclipses also happen. So wherever Gemini, north node, therefore Sagittarius, or
Hmm.
yeah, I'm trying to think of like what's on the opposite. So if
Right.
the north and the south node are on this axis, that's where your cluster of solar and lunar eclipses will end up happening. So
Hmm.
sometimes they'll come with lessons depending on, who's ruling over
Hmm.
where these eclipses are happening and where that is all in your chart and how it'll
Hmm.
affect you and how it's affecting us all because yeah, it's very fascinating to listen to wisdom around the clusters and where they're happening in the zodiac is in regards to the zodiac.
Hmm.
So they can come in and yeah, I've heard them as like kind of envisioned eclipse clusters as like a
Hmm.
portal, like we're going from this phase into this phase or a tunnel that you're trying to get through.
Hmm.
It's always been really interesting energy. Really interesting to see what's happening on a big lesson personally and globally when eclipses start hitting.
Right. Because again, you have that big lesson of where it's hitting in the sky itself, but also where those planets and where those stars happen to be in your own personal birth chart can also affect what you're doing and how that eclipse will affect you. So it might be in an area that speaks to um, transformation and growth, but it also happens to hit your internal house on familiar relationships or something that could shift. So there's
Mm-hmm.
lots of different aspects that come to it, which again ties back into that kind of chaos energy where you're trying to deal with too many things at once that can make it
Right.
challenging.
So that's what I was gonna say. Even if you're not working with the eclipse moon energy, spell work, ritual, you don't want to do any of that, you can still reflect and gain
Yes.
a lot of wisdom on your life when these eclipse energies start popping off.
Hmm.
Yeah, you can still gain a lot of wisdom from that magic, from
Yes.
that magical configurations. Well, is that all we had to say? Is that pretty much cover moon magic? I'm sure there's always
There's
deeper rabbit holes we
always
could go down.
there's more, and there's some amazing books, and there's a lot of different things that go into it, but that's kind of an oversight and an overview rather of everything that kind of relates to moon magic. Those are the big ones. But what do you guys think? Is there something that we completely missed? Do you work lunar chaos magic during an eclipse? I'd be curious to hear what your results are for things. But yeah, let
Like,
us know.
what is your favorite way to work with moon energy?
That too.
That's what, yeah, I want to know what other people do to work with the moon. Well, with all of that said, I just want to say thank you for listening to the Queer Witch Project. And if you like what you hear, make sure you give us those thumbs up and subscribe and give us some stars and, just interact with us because we really love hearing from you.
Absolutely. And if there is a topic you'd like to know more about or an episode topic you'd like to suggest, contact us at thequeerwitchproject@gmail.com or find us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram with the handle at Queer Witch Project. We upload every other week. And remember, queerness is a key to magic.
Be yourself and love rebelliously. Bye.
Bye.